Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to a fun little comparison I decided to do between college football and MLB teams, comparing what college football team is like an MLB franchise. And obviously, this is very subjective. These are just my opinions I came up with today, but I think I did a pretty good job, and I'll explain 10 or 11 different comparisons when comparing college football teams, their on-field success, what they've done. This is all based on recent history, I would say, like the past decade. What college football team goes with an MLB team? These are true comparisons, and we're going to start with Alabama football, and I'm comparing them to the Los Angeles Dodgers. So with MLB, it tends to be pretty tough to win, World Series. The Dodgers have just that one pandemic World Series, but still, the Dodgers are basically a lock to win 100 games every year. I think they're going to win 110 or 111 games this season. They're always the best team in the MLB. And then we know how good of a dynasty Nick Saban and Alabama football is. That is, in my opinion, the only single comparison you can make when it comes to comparing Alabama football and their success to the MLB. Obviously, the Dodgers don't have the championships, the World Series that Alabama football does. It's a lot harder in the MLB, a little bit more of a crapshoot in the playoffs, but just in general, the greatness of their roster, how good their team is, I think the Dodgers compare really well to Alabama football. We know Alabama, the past 10 years, they've been by far the best overall college football team, and we know the Dodgers, even though they just have one, World Series ring, overall, the regular season, you combined everything, they've been the best team. They have the best roster. They always win 100 games. And they've won the NL West like 10 years in a row or something, or like 12 out of 13 years. It is crazy dominance. The next comparison I have, it's Ohio State football with the New York Yankees. So originally, I was thinking about doing the Yankees and Notre Dame, but I don't think Notre Dame wins enough. Both Ohio State and both the Yankees win a ton, but they do struggle to win the big one. The Yankees haven't had a losing season in like 30 seasons. Ohio State is always consistently great, making the playoffs, but they have that one title since 2003, one national championship since 2003. The Yankees consistently make the playoffs. They consistently win 95, 100 games. They're always above 500, but they haven't won a ring since 2009, and both of these teams have the biggest fan bases in their respective sports. The Yankees, we know, they have by far MLB's biggest, or I wouldn't say by far, but they certainly have MLB's biggest fan base. And then Ohio State football, there was a recent study done in the offseason about the biggest college fan bases, and Ohio State was number one by 3 million fans. So kind of some parallels there. Originally, again, I was going to go with Notre Dame and the Yankees just due to kind of the fans, the allure, but I don't think Notre Dame wins nearly enough, because they've had legitimate down seasons. This season, they're 2-2. They had that season with Deshaun Kaiser where they didn't even make a bowl game. I will go with Ohio State, who's really, really good. The Yankees are always really, really good, but both of these teams have struggled to win the big one. The next comparison I'm going to make, it's going to be Clemson football and the Houston Astros. Of course, the Astros, kind of this new dynasty. Clemson under Dabo Swinney, a new dynasty. Both of these teams play in relatively easy divisions. The Houston Astros play in the AL West. That's been an easy division in recent years. Clemson plays in the ACC. That's been a relatively easy division. And you can make an argument in the last 10 years, Clemson has been the second best college football team behind Alabama. And you can make an argument that the Houston Astros have been the second best MLB team in the past decade overall, behind possibly the Dodgers. So kind of two teams. It's tough to really label these because obviously Clemson's not a franchise, but both of these teams struggled. Houston went through a tanking phase. Clemson went before Dabo Swinney, even in Dabo's first few years. But they've turned it around and they've turned into complete dynasties. Both Clemson and the Houston Astros, newer dynasties in their sports. The next comparison is going to be Georgia University, Georgia football, and the Atlanta Braves. And, I know they're both in the state of Georgia, but they're very similar when you look at Georgia breaking through, winning a national title, their success over the past few years under Kirby Smart, the Atlanta Braves breaking through last year, winning the World Series. They win their division this year. I think they won over 100 games. Both of these teams, new kids on the block, and I know they're both from Georgia. That's not the reason why I'm doing this. They're just very similar. They're new, and they're both experiencing immense success, both winning recent championships in their respective sports. The next comparison is going to be Utah football and the Tampa Bay Rays. So both of these kind of smaller, the Rays obviously very small in terms of their payroll. Utah, kind of a smaller school. They don't get the best recruits, kind of similar in that term, but they both do win and win well. They can't win the big one, but they will have significant success, and they are both smaller. The only thing that's off, I would say, Utah at least has a decent stadium. The Rays play in a complete, Tropicana field, but the parallels, both smaller, both of them have sustained success, I would say. That's why I would compare those two teams. The next comparison I have is the Philadelphia Phillies and the Michigan Wolverines, Michigan football. So this one, I would say if you exclude last year's Michigan run, it becomes a lot more accurate. Michigan did have an extremely good season last year. The Phillies, recently, they've struggled to make the playoffs. They've been above 500. They're always a solid team. They've got a really good fan base, similar to Michigan, but they're kind of struggling. Michigan football, really good past success. Philadelphia Phillies, they had those teams in the late 2000s, things like that. But of course, Michigan did have a lot of success last year. The Phillies are making their first playoff appearance since, I believe, like 2010 or 2011. So if you exclude Michigan's run last year, I think the comparison between the Phillies and Michigan becomes a lot more legitimate. But that did happen, and that, I would say, volts Michigan up a little bit, beating Ohio State, making the playoffs, and then losing to Georgia. The next comparison I'm going to say, the Chicago Cubs and Florida State football. So kind of unique, Florida State winning the national title in 2013. The Cubs winning a World Series in 2016. Both of these teams, bigger fan bases in their respective sports, not the biggest. And then they kind of come crashing down, and now we're seeing the Cubs go through another rebuild. We're seeing FSU football struggle year after year. Maybe they're kind of putting it together this year, although they did just lose. Very similar in terms of winning and then completely struggling. And also in terms of the fan base size. FSU football has a legitimate good, big fan base. Not the biggest, not one of the biggest, but legitimately healthy fan base, and so do the Chicago Cubs, but they're not the biggest. The next two teams are going to be the Oakland Athletics and Northwestern. So the Northwestern Wildcats of football and the Oakland A's. Both of these teams are either surprisingly good or extremely bad. Both of them smaller. The A's have a minimal payroll. Northwestern, of course. And how about the fields? Ryan Field, horrible mess. And then the Coliseum, we know how bad that is, one of the worst MLB facilities. So just the overall idea where the A's will have one season, they surprise everyone, win 89 games, make the wild card. Same thing with Northwestern when they make the Big Ten championship, and then the next year they're winning 3 games, and the A's are losing 100 games. So it's like they're really surprisingly good, and then they're horrible most of the time. That's kind of the comparison, and they're both smaller teams, the A's and Northwestern. The next comparison, this is kind of the irrelevant comparison. I just view the Arizona Diamondbacks as the most irrelevant MLB team, and I compare it to Washington State. Both of these teams really haven't experienced any recent success. Both of them barely get talked about. Washington State is a Power 5 team. I didn't want to, do an FCS team or anything like that. They are legitimately a Power 5 team, but they're really irrelevant. They're all the way, tucked up in one corner of the United States. Nobody talks about them. They play several of their games at 10 o'clock. And it's the same thing with the Arizona Diamondbacks in the MLB. Not a lot of recent success. They're on the western side. They play games really late. They're kind of irrelevant. So that was the comparison there. The next comparison is going to be Oklahoma State football and the Cleveland Guardians. Oklahoma State, if you go back like 10 years, they're always winning 10 games. They're always having a winning record. The Cleveland Guardians or Indians, whatever you want to call them, under Terry Francona, they've had one losing season, and in that losing season, they went 80-82. So these are underappreciated teams, under the radar teams that would surprise people if they actually looked up how good Oklahoma State's been, how good Cleveland's been within the past decade. Both underappreciated. The Indians haven't won a World Series. Oklahoma State hasn't been to the playoffs, so they slide under the radar and they don't get national recognition, but they've both been very consistently good over a long period of time. That is why I made that comparison. And then the final one, we're going with the Toronto Blue Jays and the Penn State Nittany Lions for college football. Both of these teams, bigger fan bases. They're good. They have success, but it just never feels like they can get over the hump. With Toronto, they haven't made a World Series recently. Penn State hasn't been to the playoffs. They've been to New Year's Six Bowls. Toronto's been to the playoffs, but they haven't been to the World Series. Penn State's been to New Year's Six Bowls, but they've never gotten over the Ohio State/Michigan hump and made the actual playoffs. But both of them, bigger fan bases, rabid fans, good success, nice history, just never, seem to win the big one, but they do have good recent success. So that's why I compared those two teams. But just a little fun activity I wanted to do between the MLB and college football. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.